So, Dark Phoenix has been released on digital, and I want to talk about it. I had seen the film on opening day, and I had not read any of the reviews online. I wanted to go in blind because expectations can affect how you perceive things.
There's a psychological concept called selective perception, which explains why people perceive things differently. Even if they're presented with exactly the same information as us, they may interpret it differently based on their past experiences, their knowledge, their beliefs, their values. And this can be very frustrating. You've probably seen those ambiguous pictures. Is this a young woman or an old woman? Is this an old man or a young man? Is this a man or a woman? People will see different things depending on their past experiences and their knowledge, etc. And you can influence how people perceive things by giving them the information that they need in order to see it the way you want them to see it. So for example, if you're implementing a change at work that might be awful and difficult, if you tell people that it's going to be awful and difficult, then you're setting the context, you're telling them to perceive it as being awful and difficult. If, however, you present it as being an opportunity, then they'll start to see it as an opportunity as well.
Keep that in mind because this is going to be important later on. Now, when I saw the movie, I came out conflicted. I had enjoyed the action, the effects, and thought the acting was decent overall. And I liked some of the ideas it had. But the movie felt rushed. It was way too short. Beast and Magneto's turn was just so eye-rolling. I had wondered what the freshness rating on Rotten Tomatoes was. I didn't expect a fresh, but it was an improvement over X-Men Apocalypse. So I expected it to be in the 40s or the 50s, but then I saw the meter.
Oh shit.
I was legitimately surprised, even shocked. The first critics I went to were Corey and Martin on Double Toasted, my favorite reviewers. Overall, they had the same thoughts as I did.
To me, one of the most egregious problems with it is that it's rushed. It comes in at less than 2 hours. There's a lot of things they're dealing with that if you fleshed it out, this plot could work. Mm-hmm. You really could have done something with it. But everything is just moving so fast.
They also brought up this point about the reviews on Rotten Tomatoes.
I also I look at the Rotten Tomatoes rating where it's like 20% or 14%, and I read a bunch of reviews and I was like, I see what's happening here. Everybody's pretty much saying the same thing. Mm-hmm. Like nobody, it's a collection of people that don't like it, don't hate it like it's the worst, but you don't have enough people putting it up here. So that's why its score is just going to be low.
No, there's a lot of scores where it's like out of 4 or out of 5 is 2.5 or it's a C minus. And to me, I think that's accurate. To put this down on an F level, don't think that.
Yeah. So for the past 3 months, I had read over 100 reviews on Rotten Tomatoes and other places. Many thought it was rushed like I did. Many thought the emotional core of the movie was interesting, but it got lost in favor of action. Some had thought the actors were wasted on weak material. That the movie didn't have enough levity. Many were just meh about it. Saw some say that it was structurally flawed.
I think the problem with it is this. Firstly, I think that in terms of the way in which it's plotted, the way in which it's put together, it feels very, very ramshackle. I mean, it does begin with a car crash, and there are elements in which it looked like that's the way the story is going. Now, I know that there were reshoots, but reshoots are standard on a large movie, and it's very easy to say, oh, well, there are problems with the structure which are to do with reshoots. I don't know that that's the case because I can't remember a superhero movie recently that didn't have reshoots, but it does look, I think, structurally kind of chaotic. So I think that there are at the center of it. So Sophie Turner, I think, is doing as best a job as it is possible to do. I just wish that everything that was happening around her was so much better and so much less scrappy, because it did feel terribly scrappy.
And of course, it not doing justice to the source material. Now, I agree with some of these points, and I don't agree with some of them, to each his own. However, I have come to find that it had gotten a lot of undeserved criticisms. A lot of people are misreading the tone and the plot of the movie. Films have been misread in the past, such as Starship Troopers. In this case, a lot of people are judging this movie based on what it was marketed to be and not what it was made to be. There are people who said that the movie failed at selling Jean as a villain and think that it's directionless, or think they were just playing it safe.
Like it's toothless. just go for it and have Jean. They don't commit to the turn that she makes. They don't commit to it.
They could have done anything.
They could have done anything. And they don't commit to it. They don't commit to anything. And that's where it's really aggressively meh at the end of the day. She could have, I won't say what she does or doesn't do, or what the characters do or don't do, but they are completely declawed in this movie. Nothing really of enough weight happens to make it worth it. Do anything, get crazy.
Pacing sucks too. After Jean gets her Phoenix powers and she flies away, and there's just like all the X-Men are mopey. Jean's most of the time's like, oh, I'm scared, I don't know what to do, God. Then they're like, all right, we'll just start throwing characters at her, and then she'll have to deal with that, and she'll run off and be like, oh God, do I really want this? And then she flies away again, and they're all mopey again, and I'm like, something needs to happen. How interesting can that be? Yeah, they could have just had her be this big evil that they now have to take out, but that would have been X-Men Apocalypse. Would have been a little redundant. So you have the possibility of redundancy or boredom. What to do?
The tagline for this movie reads, "Every hero has a dark side." But we never delve that deep into the darkness or psychological turmoil fuming within Jean. Her transformation into the Phoenix is undercooked. And just when she starts to rise up as an intimidating force, the film rushes to an anticlimax.
Now, they didn't do any of that stuff for two very good reasons. Number one, they wanted the movie to be like a psychological thriller. Like how First Class was a spy movie, Days of Future Past was a science fiction time travel movie, and X-Men Apocalypse was supposed to be a disaster movie. They wanted to have what Jean was going through to resemble the symptoms of a mental health problem, particularly that of schizophrenia, so that Jean's struggle could be something that resembles something real and something human.
What kind of conversations do you hope that would start once people leave theatre?
I just want a conversation to start about mental illness, because I think it needs to be at the forefront of society. Like, I think people need to talk about it as much as possible, and then people will feel more comfortable with it, less ashamed, and feel more accepted by society.
I think the thing I hope people will come away from this film, beyond just the ride of it, is that there's always a chance to help them and to bring them back.
Her being a villain and going all out would have been counterproductive to what was said in that clip.
The thing about Jean Grey is that she's not a villain, but she's not like a superhero, gonna save the world, everything is fine. She's very tormented and broken.
She wasn't meant to be this horrifying, godlike, all-powerful, ethereal force like some people think. Now, the second reason was because they wanted it to line up with the ending of X-Men Days of Future Past, which Simon Kinberg said in an interview with Screen Rant. Remember how that movie ended? It ended with Wolverine waking up in the future, and he sees Jean alive and with the X-Men, implying that she did not become the Dark Phoenix in the new timeline. Because the theme of X-Men Days of Future Past is that you can evolve and change yourself and change your fate. In other words, Jean not turning into a bad guy was spoiled 5 years ago. I'm surprised that a lot of people had forgotten about that. This movie is a prequel to that ending, so of course she wasn't going to really turn to the dark side.
Where else would he be?
Days of Future Past had took inspiration from the Terminator series, according to Simon Kinberg, who had co-wrote the film. And it's pretty evident that he takes some themes from Terminator 2 Judgment Day.
Future's not set. There's no fate but what we make for ourselves.
For the future is never truly set.
Simon Kinberg, in an interview with First Post, said that he wanted Jean to take control of her destiny. The movie opens with a narration similar to Days of Future Past about the question of destiny.
Are we destined down this path? Destined to destroy ourselves like so many species before us? Or can we evolve fast enough to change ourselves? Change our fate?
Are we destined to a fate beyond our control? Or can we evolve? Become something more?
Jean wouldn't be in control of her destiny if she, say, became this large-scale threat that destroyed a planet. Speaking of scale, I've seen some people complain about the scope and scale being small, and there not being too much spectacle, thinking that it's meant to be this high-stakes event movie.
This is where Dark Phoenix really comes up short compared to The Last Stand.
No, stop it!
As flawed as The Last Stand was, at least it felt like an event picture with a massive cast, bombastic action, and high stakes. Here, most of the X-Men are underutilized, the action is relatively small in scale compared to what we've seen before, and the audience never feels the gravitas they should.
This is an event movie that doesn't have very much action in it at all.
That actually was the goal.
So I wanted to talk a little bit about the scope of this movie, because I feel like in just about every X-Men film to date, we've had stakes that are like world-ending stakes, but Dark Phoenix feels very personal. So can you talk a little bit about why this storyline needed a more personal, smaller scope?
Yeah, well, I mean, to me, what was always most intriguing about the Dark Phoenix story in the comic was the struggle that Jean's character was going through, the personal struggle, the inner struggle that she was going through, and the notion that the person who becomes the most powerful, really, creature in the galaxy can't control that power. And what it does to the people around her, the family members essentially around her, that's what was always the most emotional and compelling to me. And so I felt like to tell that story in a way where you wouldn't lose the emotionality, you wouldn't lose that inner struggle, you would actually feel what she was going through. I wanted to make it more intimate, more raw, more dramatic, maybe than we've done before in these X-Men movies, which isn't to say there isn't spectacle and action and all that, obviously there is, but I really, the focus for me was on making a grittier, edgier, more raw film where we could really let the performances be showcased. And I also felt like, you know, I wanted to do something different with this film than we've done with other X-Men movies. It's been 20 years of making X-Men movies, and you know, I'm incredibly proud of the films that we've made, and this obviously is very much part of the lineage of that, and in many ways the culmination of the X-Men storytelling to date. But I felt as though it was time for a little bit of a you know, freshening up of the tone and the aesthetic of the movie, and it happened to you know, to match the needs of the story. So that's just, you know, the reason why it ended up being a more intimate, raw kind of film.
That is why they removed X-Men from the title and just called it Dark Phoenix.
It's called Dark Phoenix. Was it ever going to be called X-Men Dark Phoenix? Did you ever have another title?
Well, I never had another title other than Dark Phoenix or X-Men Dark Phoenix. It'll be called X-Men Dark Phoenix, I believe, internationally. Yeah. Just so that the international, the same way we did with Logan. Yeah. I wanted to call it Dark Phoenix in this, again, very much the way we wanted to call, and Hutch and Jim Mangold were big proponents of calling Logan Logan, as opposed to X-Men Logan in the United States, to indicate that it's a different kind of film, and to indicate that it's a more character-driven movie.
This was in response to X-Men Apocalypse, which, according to Simon Kinberg, back in February 2017, the mistake of that movie was that it focused too much on global stakes and not enough on personal stakes. In some ways, the movie was made to be anti-apocalypse, have less spectacle and have less scale, according to the Hollywood Reporter. Now, let's talk about the marketing of this movie, which selling point was that the X-Men will face their most devastating foe yet, which makes it sound like yet another high-stakes movie about fighting a big bad, like X-Men Apocalypse. And the trailers also make it look like that too.
I will judge this movie by what I see here, and what I see here is bad person who's super powerful, and they gotta stop her. Super powerful being. The X-Men have to stop that super powerful being, otherwise super powerful being is gonna wipe out a lot of life on Earth. But enough about X-Men Apocalypse, because that is the plot of the last movie.
According to Deadline Hollywood, the marketing mismanaged the movie's image and perception. The Hollywood Reporter said something similar, saying that the movie's marketing just got lost. Then Disney had marketed the movie as a grand finale to the X-Men series, as if it was some kind of endgame.
The X-Men's final battle will be their greatest.
You have no idea.
X-Men Dark.
Which was a bad idea because that resulted in people saying it was lacking as a finale.
It's certainly lacking for what is ostensibly the finale of the X-Men movies.
The biggest problem with Dark Phoenix is that it doesn't just fail as an adaptation of an acclaimed comic storyline either. Above all else, The film fails as a send-off for this incarnation of the X-Men. This is the true last stand. And after 20 years, Dark Phoenix should have been an epic farewell to the franchise that gave birth to the modern superhero movie.
Like, you know what's going to happen. Marvel Studios is going to come in here. They're going to take over everything. This is your last stand. Yes. This is your actual last shot. Do anything. Get crazy.
Yeah. Except they didn't know what was going to happen. Dark Phoenix was shot and finished filming before Fox had sold the studio. There is even an alternate ending where the movie ends on a cliffhanger. It being this grand finale high-stakes movie was just a marketing gimmick to get butts in the seats. They knew the movie was going to get buried in June with all the competition, and marketing like this hurts movies. Chris Stubman made a couple of videos on the matter.
Another thing that people wanted me to discuss was the fact that some trailers don't necessarily spoil plot points, but they mismarket their film. They show a film in a trailer that looks a certain way because they think that'll get the most people in the audience, but the film is not exactly that way. One of the primest examples was Drive. A lot of people watched the trailer for Drive and thought, hey, this is an action movie. Drive really is not an action movie. This didn't bother me because as I watched the trailer and saw that it won Best Picture at the Cannes Film Festival and they had that very operatic music in there, I wasn't thinking it was going to be an action film, and I knew a little bit about Nicholas Winding Refn's filmography. However, some people who didn't know those things that I just said thought they were going to go watch Transporter 4. And unfortunately for those people, they were very disappointed by that movie. And that is something that's happening a lot lately too, is it's just really a studio that is trying to promote a film in a certain way that they think the audience wants to see. They are going for a demographic that they think can make them the most money. However, sometimes that demographic comes with the movie because they were expecting a certain thing, and when the film isn't the way they thought it was going to be, these people are now upset and want their money back.
First exposure to this movie was the brilliant poster. I think it's one of the best of the year. I was so enticed by this poster and what the dog could possibly be barking at. Then there was the trailers. They were so fucking awesome. With a title like It Comes at Night and trailers that suggest some terrifying entity outside this remote forest home, I was salivating to see it. Then there was the critics. Reviews poured out of early showings reporting that it was genuinely terrifying, devastating, and a masterclass in horror filmmaking. Audiences, however, haven't been as kind. While critics seem to adore it, ticket buyers are the polar opposite. It even got a D on CinemaScore, which I don't put any stock in, but it shows you how audiences feel. A lot of this has to do with the incredibly misleading marketing campaign. As I said, that first poster was so enticing, and the trailers too. What is it? What's the dog barking at? Why doesn't the family go out at night? Why is that their #1 rule? Well, these questions aren't answered. We don't learn what's out there, if there's anything at all. And the majority of the frightening imagery in the trailer is actually pulled from many extended dream sequences that the character of Travis has. He'll wake up after having a nightmare, and so far as I can tell, these sequences have little impact on the story.
Well, you can add this movie's marketing to the list. Now, remember that clip I showed earlier about selective perception? Well, since the movie marketed as being about Jean becoming bad, some critics perceived it as being about that. They seriously believe that Jean was in fact a villain and had the same arc as she had in X3, which, isn't true, and that they wouldn't be saying this if this movie was marketed differently. Feels like a lot of people made up their minds about this movie before they even saw it. An extremely misleading marketing campaign made a movie that already wasn't very good worse in some people's eyes. Next time I will be touching on the subtext and themes I briefly touched upon in this video. Till next time.